Welcome back to another deep dive into the shadows of Five Nights at Freddy's, where tonight we're unraveling one of the franchise's most persistently enigmatic threads, a mystery so deeply woven into the fabric of the series that even after more than a decade of exhaustive analysis, passionate debate, and frame-by-frame dissection, we find ourselves still grasping at shadows, still piecing together fragments that refuse to form a complete picture. We're exploring William Afton's presence, his actions, his very existence within the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, a game that promised answers but delivered only deeper questions, a prequel that somehow made the timeline more confusing rather than clarifying it, a chapter in the Freddy Fazbear story that feels simultaneously crucial and impossible to fully understand. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 occupies this strange liminal space in the franchise's mythology. When it first released in 2014, players assumed they were getting a sequel, a continuation of the story that would build upon the foundation laid by the original game. The number 2 in the title suggested progression, forward movement through time and narrative. But Scott Cawthon had other plans, more complicated plans that would fundamentally reshape how the community understood everything they thought they knew about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and the horrors that unfolded within those cheerful, child-friendly walls. The revelation that FNAF 2 was actually a prequel, set in 1987 before the events of the first game, sent shockwaves through the theorist community, forcing everyone to reconstruct their mental timelines, to rethink the sequence of tragedies, to reconsider which events caused which consequences in this increasingly tangled web of supernatural horror and corporate negligence. But even that temporal displacement, that fundamental reordering of when things happened, pales in comparison to the central mystery we're here to explore tonight. William Afton, the man behind so much suffering, the purple figure who haunts the minigames, the killer in the rabbit suit, the architect of tragedies that echo through generations of possessed animatronics and traumatized spirits, appears throughout FNAF 2 in ways both obvious and maddeningly subtle. We see him, or at least we see a purple sprite that the community has identified as him, moving through the Save Them minigame with what appears to be malicious purpose. We hear phone guys' increasingly worried messages about investigations, about someone using a yellow suit, about animatronics behaving strangely, about a location spiraling toward closure. We observe consequences that seem to point toward Afton's involvement, fingerprints of his methods scattered throughout the week of gameplay. Yet, for all these breadcrumbs, for all the evidence that suggests he was there, that he did something, that his presence shaped the events Jeremy Fitzgerald experiences during those 5 nights plus overtime, we cannot definitively answer the most basic questions about his role. Was William Afton working at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in some official capacity? Did he commit another set of murders during the week of gameplay, adding 5 more victims to his horrific count? What exactly happened with that yellow suit phone guy mentions on night 6? Did Afton have any involvement in the Bite of 87, that infamous incident that would reshape company policy forever? Was he the one who tampered with the toy animatronics' facial recognition systems, turning sophisticated entertainment robots into aggressive threats? These questions, despite years of analysis and countless theory videos and forum discussions that span thousands of pages, remain frustratingly open to interpretation. We can propose answers, we can build elaborate theories supported by evidence, but we cannot prove them, cannot point to definitive confirmation that settles debates once and for all. This isn't a journey that will end with certainty. This isn't an exploration that concludes with a neat timeline of confirmed events and verified facts. What we're embarking on tonight is something different, something that embraces the ambiguity rather than fighting against it. We're going to examine every piece of evidence, every phone guy call, every minigame frame, every community theory that has gained traction over the years. We'll look at what supports these theories and what contradicts them, what makes them compelling and what makes them questionable. We'll explore why, after all this time, William Afton's role in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 remains one of the franchise's greatest unsolved mysteries, a puzzle with pieces that never quite fit together, no matter how many different ways we arrange them. So settle in, let the night embrace you, and prepare to drift through a story where the questions themselves become more compelling than any answers we might find. Whether you're encountering these mysteries for the first time, allowing the familiar enigmas to wash over you like a dark lullaby, or simply letting the exploration guide you into rest, this deep dive will carry you through the fog of FNAF 2's most persistent questions, through the shadows where William Afton may or may not be lurking, through the uncertainty that has defined this chapter of the franchise since its release. The story begins, as so many FNAF 2 discussions do, with a phone call. Night 6, Jeremy Fitzgerald's final scheduled shift, and Phone Guy's voice crackles through the receiver with unusual urgency, with confusion that breaks through his normally composed corporate demeanor. He's calling to ask why Jeremy is even there, why he's working a shift when he should have received a memo about the location being temporarily closed. But it's what Phone Guy says next that has launched 1,000 theories, sparked countless debates, and remains as mysterious and open to interpretation today as it was when players first heard these words more than a decade ago. Someone used one of the suits, Phone Guy reveals, his voice carrying a weight that suggests he understands this is significant even if he doesn't fully grasp why. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right. These sentences, seemingly straightforward on the surface, contain layers upon layers of implication, ambiguity, and unanswered questions that unpack into hours of discussion and analysis. This yellow suit incident, as the community has come to call it, represents a turning point in the events of FNAF 2, a moment where something shifted, where the already tense and dangerous situation at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. But let's start with the most fundamental question, the one that every theory about this incident must address, the question that determines so much about how we interpret the events. Which suit is Phone Guy talking about? He specifies that it was yellow, that it was a spare kept in the back, that someone used it. But the FNAF universe contains multiple yellow suits, and the specific identity of this particular costume has profound implications for understanding what actually happened during the events leading up to that Night 6 phone call. The two primary candidates that have dominated community discussion are Golden Freddy and Spring Bonnie, each with their own compelling evidence, each with their own problems and contradictions that prevent either from being universally accepted as the definitive answer. Golden Freddy, the slumped, ghostly animatronic that appears throughout FNAF 2 in his characteristic ethereal way, represents one possibility. He's golden yellow in color, which matches Phone Guy's description perfectly. His appearances in the game are already strange and supernatural, materializing in the office as a disembodied suit, appearing in the hallway as a floating head, existing in ways that defy the normal rules that govern how animatronics move and behave. Many in the community believe Golden Freddy might be connected to Fredbear from earlier iterations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, making him a legacy character, a spare from previous locations that would fit Phone Guy's description of having a yellow suit in the back. The evidence supporting Golden Freddy as the suit in question is compelling in several ways that deserve careful consideration. First, there's the timing and prominence of Golden Freddy on night 6, the same night Phone Guy makes his yellow suit call. Players notice that Golden Freddy becomes significantly more aggressive on this particular night, as if his suit being disturbed or used has somehow activated or agitated the spirit within. This correlation between Phone Guy mentioning the yellow suit and Golden Freddy's increased activity suggests a connection, a cause and effect relationship where the suit being used triggers supernatural consequences that manifest in gameplay. Second, Phone Guy's statement that they had a spare in the back implies this suit wasn't part of the main performance lineup, which aligns perfectly with Golden Freddy's status throughout the series as a decommissioned or backup animatronic, a character who exists in the margins rather than taking center stage. He's not performing for children, he's not part of the active roster, he's something kept in storage, forgotten until needed, or until someone decides to use him for purposes other than entertainment. However, the Spring Bonnie theory presents an equally persuasive case, one that ties more directly into William Afton's established methods of operation throughout the franchise. Spring Bonnie, the yellow rabbit suit that Afton famously used to lure children to their deaths in the original Missing Children incident, represents Afton's signature disguise, his preferred method for gaining the trust of victims before leading them to isolated areas where he could commit his horrific crimes. The training tapes in FNAF 3 explicitly reference Spring Bonnie as one of the Springlock suits used at the locations, and we know from the broader lore that these suits were designed to function both as animatronics and as wearable costumes for employees, creating a dual-purpose design that also created the potential for catastrophic failures that could crush and kill the person wearing them. Those who argue for Spring Bonnie being the yellow suit point to Phone Guy's specific wording, to the implications embedded in how he describes what happened. When he says someone used it, the implication is that someone wore the suit, physically put it on and walked around in it, which aligns more naturally with Spring Bonnie's design as a wearable costume rather than Golden Freddy, who in FNAF 2 appears more as a ghostly apparition, a supernatural manifestation that doesn't seem to have a physical suit component that someone could simply access and wear. The Springlock suits were specifically designed for employees to wear, with mechanisms that would retract the animatronic parts to make room for a human body. Whereas Golden Freddy's nature in FNAF 2 seems more spectral, less tangible, less like something that could be physically worn by a person attempting to move through the building undetected. Additionally, the consequence Phone Guy describes, that none of them are acting right after the suit was used, could indicate that the animatronics recognized William Afton in the Spring Bonnie costume and became agitated by the presence of their killer. The withered animatronics in parts and service are possessed by the spirits of Afton's previous victims from the original Missing Children incident, children he murdered years ago while wearing that same yellow rabbit suit. If these spirits, trapped in their mechanical bodies, sensed their killer nearby, detected the presence of the costume he wore when he lured them to their deaths, their reaction would be intense, would manifest as increased aggression and erratic behavior that Phone Guy would observe without understanding the supernatural cause behind it. But here's where the mystery deepens into genuine uncertainty, into territory where we must acknowledge that definitive answers may not exist. Some theorists have suggested that the yellow suit isn't either of these options, that it could be a third possibility we haven't fully considered, or that hasn't been shown in the games? Could there have been another yellow animatronic at the location? One not shown in gameplay, but referenced in this phone call. The FNAF universe has established that multiple versions of characters exist across different locations and time periods. That Fazbear Entertainment maintains various iterations of their mascots at different establishments. Could the spare in the back have been an entirely different yellow suit we've never seen, a Fredbear variant, or a different character altogether? Something that existed at this location, but wasn't programmed into the game's animatronic roster because it wasn't relevant to the player's survival experience. The ambiguity extends beyond just the suit's identity to the timeline of when it was actually used, when this incident occurred that phone guy mentions with such concern on night 6. His wording suggests recent past tense. Someone used one of the suits sounds like it happened shortly before the call, perhaps during the previous day or the previous night. But we know from earlier phone calls that the investigation phone guy mentions has been ongoing for several nights already. On night 4, he first brings up that there's been somewhat of an investigation going on, and by night 5, the location is on lockdown, with restrictions on previous employees entering the building. So did the yellow suit incident occur during night 5's day shift, triggering the most severe response and leading to the closure phone guy announces on night 6? Or did it happen earlier in the week, with its consequences only fully manifesting or being discovered by this final night? Consider the progression of events as phone guy describes them across the week. Night 3 brings his attempt to ease Jeremy's mind about any rumors that might be circulating, carefully trying to reassure without actually specifying what these rumors are about, which immediately tells us something concerning is being discussed among staff or in the community. By night 4, there's an investigation underway, though phone guy insists everything will be sorted out soon, maintaining his characteristic optimism even as official scrutiny descends on the location. Night 5 brings the lockdown, the restrictions on previous employees, and a sudden opening in the day shift position, suggesting someone who held that role is suddenly unavailable for reasons phone guy doesn't explain. Then, night 6 arrives with the revelation about the yellow suit, the closure of the location, and phone guy's almost panicked confusion about why Jeremy would still be there when the building is supposed to be closed. This progression suggests multiple possible interpretations of when the suit was used and how it connects to the other events of the week. Perhaps someone used the suit earlier in the week, possibly on night 3 or 4, and this usage led to the investigation phone guy mentions. Authorities investigating missing children or suspicious activities would naturally want to know about mascot costumes, about who had access to them, about whether any had been used recently in ways that violated company policy. The investigation uncovers concerning evidence, possibly linking the suit to crimes or suspicious behavior, which triggers the more severe lockdown response on night 5. By night 6, the full implications of what happened have become clear enough to warrant closing the location entirely, at least temporarily, with the yellow suit being identified as a key piece of evidence in whatever crime or incident occurred. Alternatively, the yellow suit could have been used on night 5 during the day shift, representing the final straw that pushed management to close the location. Perhaps someone accessed the suit while the building was on lockdown, either bypassing security measures or using legitimate access that shouldn't have been legitimate. And this brazen violation during what should have been a secured crime scene prompted the immediate closure that phone guy announces the next night. This interpretation makes the suit usage feel more immediate, more directly connected to the closure, but it raises questions about how someone could access a suit during a lockdown, supposedly designed to prevent exactly that kind of unauthorized activity. The phrase "now none of them are acting right" deserves its own careful examination, its own exploration of what this might mean in the context of animatronics that have already been malfunctioning and hostile throughout the week. Phone Guy has been talking about the animatronics behaving strangely from night one, particularly the toy animatronics with their aggressive tendencies towards staff members that he attributes to possible tampering with their facial recognition systems. But this statement on night 6 seems to suggest a new development, a change in behavior that correlates specifically with the yellow suit being used, as if whatever happened with that suit caused the animatronics to shift into an even more dangerous or erratic state than they were already exhibiting. What does acting right even mean when we're talking about animatronics that are already attacking night guards, that are already crawling through vents and appearing in offices with clear intent to harm? One interpretation is that the use of the yellow suit caused a specific change in how the animatronics perceive and respond to night guards or staff members. If we accept the theory that William Afton used a yellow suit to commit crimes at this location, then perhaps the animatronics, whether through their tampered recognition software or through spiritual awareness if they're possessed, began reacting differently once they encountered someone in that particular costume. The withered animatronics, already possessed by the spirits of Afton's previous victims, would certainly have a reason to become more aggressive, more determined, more actively hostile if they sense their killer's presence, or if they recognize the costume he wore when he murdered them. But there's another layer to consider, one that becomes apparent when we examine what Phone Guy doesn't say, the gaps and omissions in his explanation that might be as significant as what he does reveal. He never explicitly states who used the suit, never identifies the person, or provides any description beyond the action itself. This could be Phone Guy being deliberately vague, protecting information related to an ongoing investigation, adhering to legal advice that tells employees not to discuss specific details of crimes or suspects while authorities are still building their case. Or it could indicate that Phone Guy genuinely doesn't know who used the suit, that this remains a mystery even to the staff at the location, that whoever accessed the suit did so without being caught on camera or witnessed by employees, leaving only the evidence of the suit having been worn without identification of who wore it. The back room itself represents another point of ambiguity, another question that affects how we interpret the entire incident. Where exactly was this back where the yellow suit was stored? FNAF locations traditionally have areas hidden from public view, spaces that don't appear on the maps players see, rooms that exist beyond the gameplay areas, safe rooms that don't appear on any map or digital systems, parts and service rooms where damaged animatronics await repair, storage areas where old equipment and costumes are kept until needed or until they're finally disposed of. The specific location of the yellow suit matters tremendously because it affects who would have had access to it, who could have known it was there, who would have been able to reach it without immediately raising alarms or being stopped by other employees. If the suit was stored in a safe room, as some theories suggest, this would indicate that only someone with inside knowledge of the location's design could have accessed it. Safe rooms, as established in FNAF 3's training tapes, were deliberately hidden from building plans and from the animatronics' navigation systems, designed to provide employees with spaces where they could escape if the animatronics became hostile, but also serving as areas where things could be hidden from official documentation. Using a suit stored in such a location would require not just physical access to the building, but specific awareness of where these hidden rooms existed, what they contained, and how to access them without leaving obvious traces of entry. This level of knowledge suggests either a current or former employee, someone who had worked at the location long enough to learn about spaces that wouldn't be shown to new hires during standard orientation. The community has exhaustively analyzed every possible implication of this yellow suit incident, approaching it from every angle, considering every theory. Yet no consensus has emerged even after more than a decade of discussion. Some believe it was William Afton in Spring Bonnie, committing the murders shown in the Save Them minigame, using his tried and true method of disguising himself as a beloved children's character to gain trust and access. Others argue it was Golden Freddy being disturbed or manipulated, that someone moved or wore this ghostly suit and caused supernatural effects on the other animatronics through some kind of spiritual chain reaction. Still, others propose scenarios involving innocent employees accidentally triggering spring lock failures while trying on costumes they didn't understand, or unknowingly wearing a suit with dark significance, becoming unwitting participants in events they couldn't comprehend. What makes this mystery particularly frustrating for those of us trying to understand FNAF 2's events is that the yellow suit incident seems like it should be central to the story, like it should be a key that unlocks our understanding of what happened during this week in November 1987. Phone Guy presents it as important enough to mention specifically in his Night 6 call. Important enough to correlate with the location's closure, yet not important enough, apparently, to explain in any detail that would help us understand what actually occurred. This could be Scott Cawthon's intentional design philosophy at work, leaving this element deliberately vague to allow players to fill in the gaps with their own interpretations, to engage with the story as active participants rather than passive recipients of information. Or it could be that the yellow suit incident is meant to be obvious in retrospect, that once we understand other pieces of the puzzle from later games or supplementary materials, we're supposed to look back and realize what this was referring to, though that retrospective clarity has yet to materialize even after many more games and books have been released. The yellow suit incident stands as one of FNAF 2's central enigmas, a piece of evidence that feels simultaneously crucial and unknowable, important and frustratingly vague. It connects to themes that run throughout the franchise: the danger of springlock suits, the use of mascot costumes to deceive and harm children, the animatronics' reactions to specific triggers or presences. But for all these connections, for all the theories that have been proposed and debated in countless forum threads and video comment sections, we still don't have a definitive answer to the simple question of what exactly happened with that yellow suit in the back. Who used it? Why they used it? What they did while wearing it? And what consequences truly flowed from that action remain open questions, mysteries we can theorize about but cannot conclusively solve. Moving from what we hear in phone calls to what we see in the game's cryptic minigames, if the yellow suit incident provides auditory evidence of William Afton's involvement in FNAF 2's events, then the Save Them minigame offers visual confirmation of his presence, though presented in the most unsettling and ambiguous way possible. This death minigame, which players encounter randomly after being jump-scared by one of the animatronics, places us in control of Withered Freddy as he navigates the halls of the 1987 Freddy Fazbear's pizza location. And what we find there paints a picture of horror and helplessness that has captivated and disturbed the community in equal measure since players first stumbled into this nightmarish scenario. The minigame opens with Withered Freddy somewhere in the pizzeria, his white glowing eyes suggesting awareness, consciousness, perhaps even purpose beyond simple programming. The puppet appears, this mysterious marionette character seemingly guiding Freddy through the location, leading him towards something, though what that destination might be remains unclear throughout the minigame's brief, disturbing duration. As we follow this ethereal marionette through corridor after corridor, through rooms and halls that roughly correspond to the layout we navigate during regular gameplay, we begin to notice details that shouldn't be there, evidence of something terrible that has already occurred or is occurring, even as we explore these digital spaces. Bodies, small bodies, scattered throughout the location in places where security cameras would have blind spots. Hidden in corners and rooms where children shouldn't be alone, where staff should have been watching but clearly weren't, where something went horribly wrong without anyone noticing or intervening in time. 5 bodies in total, each represented by the same simple grey sprite, each positioned in a way that suggests they were placed there deliberately, arranged in locations that would avoid immediate discovery, that would buy time for whoever put them there to escape or establish an alibi, or continue whatever other activities they had planned. 1 body lies in a party room, another in the main hallway, a third near what appears to be Kids Cove, where Mangle's area would be, a 4th near the prize corner where the puppet resides, and a 5th on what seems to be the show stage itself. The minigame's audio design contributes significantly to its eerie, unsettling atmosphere. At regular intervals throughout the exploration, a deep, distorted voice calls out individual letters that gradually spell a message when put together. S-A-V-E-T-H-E-M. Save them. A plea or a command, an instruction that seems directed at withered Freddy or at us as players, urging intervention in events that have already transpired, asking us to prevent or reverse something that may be beyond our power to change. But as we navigate through the location, following the puppet towards some unknown destination, attempting to understand what we're being asked to do, we encounter an obstacle that renders the message tragically, horribly ironic. There's a chance, small but significant enough, that most players have encountered it at some point, that as you move through certain rooms in the minigame, a figure will appear at the far end of the area. A purple figure, rendered in a darker shade than the purple used for other sprites in the game, with white pinprick eyes that stand out against the dark color, and what appears to be a golden badge on its chest, a small but significant detail that has fueled countless theories about this figure's identity and role. This figure moves in a straight line toward withered Freddy with mechanical certainty, with purpose that suggests hostile intent, and if it makes contact, the minigame doesn't end with the usual red static or standard game over screen. Instead, the screen fills with blue interference, a different color that immediately signals this is a special encounter, something unique and significant. And 2 words appear in the lower left corner, delivering a message that cuts to the heart of the minigame's tragedy. You can't save them. You can't stop what has happened. You can't prevent what is occurring. You can't intervene in events that have already transpired or are transpiring beyond your reach. The message is clear in its hopelessness, definitive in its denial of agency, and the figure that delivers this message, the obstacle that prevents Freddy from completing whatever purpose the puppet has set, the entity that blocks our path and tells us our efforts are futile, is widely recognized throughout the community as William Afton in his purple guy sprite form, present at the location during or immediately after the commission of another set of murders. Let's examine what we can determine from this minigame's details, starting with the figure itself, with this purple sprite that has become synonymous with William Afton throughout the franchise. The purple guy in Save Them differs from previous purple guy appearances in subtle but potentially significant ways that careful observers have noted over years of frame-by-frame analysis. He's rendered in a darker shade of purple, almost indigo in certain lighting interpretations, suggesting perhaps a different time period, a different context, or a different aspect of Afton's presence than what we've seen in previous games' minigames. The badge on his chest is particularly noteworthy, a detail that doesn't appear on Purple Guy sprites in other minigames from FNAF 1 or from later games, making this a unique characteristic specific to his appearance in Save Them. This badge suggests an official capacity, a legitimate position within the pizzeria's staff structure that would explain his presence and his ability to move through the location without immediately triggering alarms or raising suspicion. Many theorists have interpreted this badge as evidence that William Afton was working at the FNAF 2 location in some official capacity during the events of the game, possibly as a security guard given that guards typically wear badges, or as a daytime employee in maintenance or management, any role that would provide him with a badge identifying him as authorized staff. This would explain how he had access to the building during operating hours, why he could move through the halls without parents or other staff members questioning his presence, how he might have been able to lure children to isolated areas without immediately raising red flags, why he could access back rooms and storage areas where suits were kept. The badge represents authority, trustworthiness, the appearance of legitimacy that would allow a predator to operate within a family establishment undetected, exploiting the trust that comes with official employment. The 5 bodies scattered throughout the location represent perhaps the most direct evidence we have of additional murders occurring during or around the FNAF 2 time period. Concrete visual confirmation that children died at this location, that something terrible happened within these walls. But here's where we need to be careful, where we need to acknowledge that even this seemingly straightforward evidence opens into questions and contradictions that have divided the community for years. These aren't the same children from the original missing children incident. That tragedy occurred at a previous location, at an earlier Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and involved children whose spirits possess the withered animatronics we see stored in parts and service. Those victims, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, are already accounted for in the franchise's lore, their deaths having occurred years before FNAF 2's events. So these 5 bodies in Save Them represent new victims, children killed at this new location during this specific time frame of 1987, expanding Afton's victim count and raising questions about his methods, his motivations, his reasons for continuing to kill. But the specifics, the timeline, the exact circumstances, these remain frustratingly ambiguous despite the visual evidence right in front of us. Do these 5 bodies represent children who were murdered by William Afton during the week of FNAF 2's gameplay, during Jeremy Fitzgerald's 5 Nights Plus overtime? Or do they represent a previous incident at this location, something that occurred before Jeremy's first night, perhaps during the summer months, when the June 26th date from the newspaper clippings would place missing children reports? The answer has profound implications for our understanding of Afton's movements, his methods, his presence at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, determining whether we're looking at active crimes happening during the week we experience, or looking at the aftermath of crimes that occurred months earlier. The theory that these murders occurred during the week of gameplay aligns compellingly with Phone Guy's descriptions throughout his calls, with the progression of events he describes from rumors to investigation, to lockdown, to closure. If we place the Save Them minigame events on Night 5, or during its preceding day shift, Suddenly, many of Phone Guy's statements make perfect sense, clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their correct positions. The investigation he mentions on night 4 could be into missing children or disturbing reports from the day shift. Parents calling to say their children didn't come home from a birthday party. Employees reporting that they can't account for all the children who were supposed to leave with their families. The lockdown on night 5 could be in response to bodies being discovered or to children being confirmed missing, with the location becoming a crime scene that requires securing. The yellow suit incident on night 6 could be the identification of how the perpetrator accessed restricted areas or how they lured the victims, the final piece clicking into place that explains the method used to commit these crimes. This interpretation suggests that William Afton infiltrated the new location, possibly gained employment there in some capacity as the badge would indicate, and used that access to commit another set of murders, repeating his crimes from years earlier, unable or unwilling to stop his pattern of targeting children at Freddy Fazbear establishments. The presence of 5 victims mirrors the 5 children from the original missing children incident, suggesting a pattern or a ritual in Afton's methodology, a consistent number that might hold significance to him, or might simply represent the number he could successfully lure and kill before his activities attracted attention. The fact that these bodies are positioned in camera blind spots indicates planning and knowledge of the security system's limitations, shows that whoever did this understood the layout of surveillance coverage and deliberately chose locations that would avoid immediate detection. However, this interpretation faces significant challenges when we examine the timeline more carefully, when we look at the specific dates provided in the games and try to make them align with this theory. The paychecks Jeremy receives at the end of Night 5 and Night 6 are dated November 12th and November 13th, 1987. Specific dates that place FNAF 2's events firmly in mid to late autumn of that year, but newspaper clippings from the original FNAF game, clippings that players found and analyzed back when trying to understand the first game's story, specify that 2 children went missing on June 26th, with additional children reported missing after that, and a suspect captured the following day. If we're meant to understand that the Save Them minigame depicts the same incident mentioned in those newspapers, then we have a 5-month discrepancy that doesn't make logical sense, that creates a contradiction we can't easily explain away. This timeline contradiction has led to an alternative interpretation that the Save Them minigame isn't showing us murders occurring during Jeremy's week of employment, but rather showing us the aftermath of murders that happened months earlier during the summer of 1987. In this view, the minigame functions as a flashback or a psychic impression, the withered animatronics consciousness showing us what occurred at this location before the events of gameplay, when the bodies were fresher, when the horror was more immediate, when the crimes had just been committed. This would align the minigame with the June newspaper date, explaining that discrepancy by placing the Save Them events in the summer rather than in November, making them part of the past rather than part of the present we experience as Jeremy. If we accept this flashback interpretation, then the Save Them minigame serves a different narrative purpose in the game structure. It's not evidence of William Afton being present during the week of November 1987, actively committing crimes while Jeremy works his shifts. Instead, it's confirmation that he was at this location earlier in the year, that he committed crimes here during the summer months, and that the investigation and lockdown Phone Guy mentions might be related to new evidence emerging about these older murders rather than fresh crimes being committed. Perhaps authorities reopened the case. Perhaps new witnesses came forward. Perhaps forensic analysis finally provided leads that weren't available immediately after the crimes. This interpretation makes the investigation feel less urgent, less like responding to an active threat, but perhaps more thorough, more like building a comprehensive case with months of investigation behind it. The blue static that appears when Purple Guy touches withered Freddy in the minigame has become another point of intense analysis and theorizing. Throughout FNAF, color coding often carries meaning, represents different types of events or different states of reality. Red typically represents failure, death, the standard game over screens we see when animatronics catch us. But blue appears rarely in the franchise, and when it does, it seems to signify something different, something special or unusual about the encounter we're experiencing. Some theorists propose that the blue static could indicate a temporal displacement, suggesting that when Purple Guy touches Freddy in the minigame, we're being pulled out of a memory or flashback, yanked back to present reality from a vision of past events. This would support the flashback interpretation, treating the minigame as a vision or psychic impression, rather than as depicting current events, with the blue static marking the boundary between past and present, between memory and reality. Others suggest that the blue static represents a more direct confrontation between Purple Guy and the animatronic consciousness, that this encounter is somehow more real than the typical minigame deaths, more connected to actual events that transpired. The different color could indicate that this isn't just a game over, isn't just the player failing to complete the minigame, but rather represents something that actually happened, an actual encounter where Afton blocked the possessed animatronics from reaching the victims, from intervening in his crimes, asserting his dominance and control over the situation in ways that left a mark on the spirits trapped in these machines. The message, "You can't," takes on different meanings under these various interpretations, shifts in significance depending on whether we're looking at present events or past memories. If it's a flashback to crimes that occurred months ago, then "you can't" means we can't change what has already happened. Can't save children who died back in June. Can't alter the past no matter how desperately the puppet guides us or how urgently withered Freddy searches. If it's depicting present tense events happening during Jeremy's week, then "you can't" means we can't stop Afton while he's actively committing these crimes, can't intervene even as we witness the horror, powerless to prevent tragedy even when we see it unfolding. Either way, the message is one of helplessness, of limitations, of being too late or too powerless to make the difference we desperately want to make. The puppet's role in the Save Them minigame deserves significant attention, requires us to consider what this enigmatic character is trying to accomplish by guiding withered Freddy through the location. The marionette leads free, carry darkness with them wherever they appear, and serve as visible evidence of invisible traumas that have soaked into the very walls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, stains that can't be cleaned away, suffering that manifests as these wrong, broken entities that shouldn't exist but do. The withered animatronics occupy a unique and crucial position in FNAF 2's roster of threats, distinguished from the toy animatronics by their confirmed status as haunted machines. Unlike the toys whose possession remains debatable and uncertain, the withered group, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, are unambiguously and definitively haunted by the spirits of children murdered years before. These are the same machines that house the spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, the children who fell victim to William Afton in the original missing children incident at a previous Freddy Fazbear location. Their consciousness, their supernatural awareness, their relentless drive to attack night guards, all of these stem directly from the trauma of being murdered and then bound to animatronic endoskeletons through the puppet's gift of life, trapped in metal bodies they don't understand, unable to move on, unable to find peace. When we first encounter the withered animatronics in parts and service through the camera system, they're in deplorable condition, showing signs of years of use and minimal maintenance. Bonnie's face has been partially removed, exposing the endoskeleton beneath and creating a twisted, nightmarish visage that strips away any pretense of friendly entertainment mascot. Chica's hands are bare endoskeleton, metallic and skeletal, her jaw hanging loose in a permanent scream that suggests damage or deliberate alteration. Foxy appears relatively intact compared to his companions, but still bears the scars of disrepair that earned the entire group their withered designation. Freddy, while more complete than his bandmates, shows damage and deterioration that speaks to years of operation without proper care or maintenance. Phone Guy explains on night 2 that these animatronics were kept from an older location, brought to the new pizzeria, with the initial plan of repairing them and retrofitting them with newer technology. The company wanted to salvage them, to update them with the same facial recognition software and mobility improvements that made the toy line so advanced and sophisticated. But the project was abandoned partway through, deemed not worth the investment required. The withered animatronics smelled bad, Phone Guy mentions almost apologetically, as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a horrifying detail. They had what appeared to be blood and mucus around their facial areas, physical evidence of their possessed nature that the company couldn't explain away or clean adequately. Management decided it would be more cost-effective and publicly acceptable to create entirely new animatronics, rather than refurbish machines that carried such disturbing evidence of their haunted nature, giving up on the withered group and relegating them to parts donors. So the withered animatronics sit in parts and service, officially designated as sources of spare parts for repairing the toys when needed. Their components to be scavenged piecemeal until nothing useful remains. But something about this explanation doesn't quite add up when we observe their actual behavior during gameplay. When we see how these supposedly inactive machines move through the building at night. These animatronics, despite being supposedly powered down, despite lacking any programming or power sources that would justify movement, navigate halls, crawl through vents, and appear in Jeremy's office with clear purpose and awareness. They're not randomly stumbling around due to malfunctions. They're actively hunting, pursuing the night guard with intent that can only be described as malicious. The standard explanation for why possessed animatronics attack night guards has become somewhat accepted in the FNAF community through years of theorizing. The children's spirits, traumatized by their murders and confused about their current state, see all adults as potential threats or as their killer. They've been locked in a state of perpetual childhood, mixed with murderous intent, unable to mature or develop beyond the moment of their deaths, unable to distinguish between William Afton and any other person in a security guard uniform. When they see someone in the office, particularly at night when the locations are supposed to be empty, their instinct is to attack, to stuff that person into an animatronic suit, either as revenge against who they think is their murderer, or as a twisted attempt to make that person like them, to transform the guard into another possessed animatronic, to create companionship in their isolated existence. But this explanation, while widely accepted, leaves room for questions about the withered animatronics' specific behavior in FNAF 2 that deserve consideration. These spirits have been possessing these machines for years, since the missing children incident occurred at the previous location, sometime in the mid-1980s. they've had time to develop awareness beyond the initial confusion of death and possession, to understand their situation to some degree, to learn the patterns and rhythms of these locations. The fact that they're relatively calm during the day and only become aggressive at night suggests a level of control or understanding about when it's appropriate to act, when they can move without immediate discovery, when they're unlikely to face consequences for their actions. Phone Guy mentions that the withered animatronics shouldn't be able to walk around at all, that their movement defies the technical limitations of machines without power or proper programming. But if they do move, the Freddy mask trick should work on them. This casual acknowledgement that they move, despite lacking any logical reason to do so, speaks to how Fazbear Entertainment has normalized the supernatural occurrences at these locations, accepted the impossible as routine. The management knows these machines are possessed, understands that normal rules of mechanics and programming don't apply to them, yet they continue operating, continue hiring guards, continue pretending that everything can be managed with policy and procedure, rather than acknowledging they're running haunted establishments where the dead seek revenge. The withered animatronic-specific behaviors reveal potential differences in how the various spirits within them perceive and interact with the world around them. Withered Foxy, for instance, can be repelled by flashing a light at him when he appears in the hallway, suggesting he retains some sensitivity to light, perhaps a memory of his original programming or a quirk of the spirit possessing him. Phone Guy even notes that the Freddy mask might not work on Foxy, that he seems to operate under slightly different rules than the others, as if the spirit possessing him has different capabilities or different limitations than the spirits in the other withered animatronics. Withered Freddy appears to have special significance within the group, suggested both by his starring role in the Save Them minigame, where he's the character we control, and by certain gameplay behaviors that distinguish him from the others. When Golden Freddy is active and his poster appears in the hallway, it can help predict or signal certain events, creating connections between Withered Freddy and this mysterious golden character. The relationships between Withered Freddy, Golden Freddy, and the original Fredbear character create a web of connections that might influence how the spirits within these machines interact and respond to situations at the pizzeria. The question of what the withered animatronics might sense about William Afton's presence at the new location is particularly intriguing to consider. Opens possibilities about their awareness and capabilities. If Afton was indeed working at this pizzeria during the events of FNAF 2, either as a guard or in some other capacity as various theories propose, would the spirits within the withered animatronics recognize him? Would they sense their killer nearby after years of imprisonment in these mechanical bodies? Phone Guy's Night 6 call about someone using a yellow suit and the animatronics not acting right afterward could potentially be describing the withered group's reaction to detecting Afton at the location, though this remains interpretive rather than confirmed by explicit statement. Consider what might happen if William Afton worked at the FNAF 2 location during the day, while Jeremy Fitzgerald worked nights, a scenario that several theories propose. The withered animatronics would be exposed to Afton during day shift hours, trapped in their immobile states in parts and service, forced to endure the presence of their murderer without being able to act against him, unable to move or speak or do anything except exist in close proximity to the person who killed them. This could build tremendous frustration and rage within the spirits, emotions that would have no outlet during the day when they're powerless. When night comes and they can move, when the supernatural influence that animates them can override their mechanical limitations, that anger might be directed at whoever is in the building, which unfortunately for Jeremy means him. This scenario could offer one explanation for why the withered animatronics are so aggressive toward Jeremy, despite his complete innocence, despite him having nothing to do with their deaths or their imprisonment. They're not mistaking him for Afton necessarily. They're not confused about his identity. Instead, they're taking out their fury at being unable to reach Afton by attacking whoever they can reach, which happens to be the Night Guard. It's misdirected vengeance born from helplessness and rage, a tragic outcome where Jeremy suffers because of crimes he had nothing to do with, becoming a victim of violence meant for someone else simply because he's accessible when the true target isn't. The intelligence the withered animatronics display throughout gameplay complicates efforts to understand them as simple haunted machines operating on pure instinct or emotion. They demonstrate problem-solving abilities that suggest conscious thought, learning that they can use the vents to bypass certain defenses, figuring out that they need to approach the office from different angles to maximize their chances of reaching Jeremy. This strategic thinking suggests consciousness beyond mere possession, actual minds at work within the mechanical shells, awareness and planning capability that goes beyond what we'd expect from traumatized children's spirits simply lashing out. Some theorists propose that the children's spirits have merged with the animatronics' AI programs in some way, creating hybrid consciousnesses that combine human awareness with machine logic. This could explain behaviors that seem too calculated for traumatized children's ghosts, but too purposeful for malfunctioning robots, creating entities that are something more than either component alone. The children's spirits provide the motivation and the awareness, the emotional drive, and the supernatural capability to move without power, while the animatronics programming provides the methods and capabilities, the knowledge of how to navigate the building and the understanding of optimal approaches. They work together in an unholy synthesis that makes these possessed machines far more dangerous than either spirits or robots alone would be. The withered animatronics' physical condition, their mechanical deterioration, might also affect their spiritual state in ways we haven't fully considered. The decay of their mechanical bodies could be causing the spirits within to suffer in new ways beyond the trauma of their deaths and initial possession. Their connection to the physical world might be degrading along with the machines they inhabit, making them feel as though they're fading or dissolving, intensifying their desperation and aggression. This could make them more violent, more determined to act while they still can, more likely to lash out in fear that their opportunity for revenge or their ability to remain in the physical world is slipping away as their mechanical bodies deteriorate. Golden Freddy's relationship to the withered group deserves specific attention as we examine these possessed machines. He appears in FNAF 2 as a ghostly presence rather than a physical animatronic, manifesting in the office with his characteristic slumped posture, causing an instant game over, if not dealt with immediately by putting on the Freddy mask. Unlike the other withered animatronics, who can be fooled by the mask even after they enter the office, Golden Freddy requires that mask to be put on immediately upon seeing him, before his form fully manifests, suggesting he operates under different rules. That the spirit possessing him has different capabilities or restrictions than the others. The widely accepted theory within the community is that Golden Freddy is possessed by a child named Cassidy, often referred to as the vengeful spirit, the one who many believe becomes particularly fixated on tormenting William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night. If this interpretation is correct and Cassidy's spirit is more powerful, or more rage-filled, or more determined than the other children, this could explain Golden Freddy's unique properties that distinguish him from the other possessed animatronics. His ability to teleport rather than physically moving through the building, to appear as a disembodied head floating in the hallway, to kill instantly without the standard jump scare animation that other animatronics use. All of these could stem from Cassidy possessing different capabilities or a different level of power than the other spirits. The presence of both the withered animatronics and Golden Freddy at the FNAF 2 location means that all 5 spirits from the original Missing Children incident are present during Jeremy's week of employment. These aren't new hauntings still learning their capabilities. These are established ghosts who have been dead for years, who have existed in these mechanical forms long enough to develop patterns and behaviors and understanding of their state. Their actions during FNAF 2 represent the continuation of their endless undeath, another chapter in a supernatural imprisonment that shows no signs of ending, years of suffering with no resolution in sight. When the FNAF 2 location closes at the end of the game, Phone Guy mentions that the old animatronics will be kept in hopes of using them at a smaller budget location. This becomes the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from FNAF 1, where these same withered animatronics will be rebuilt into the classic designs players encounter in the first game. The spirits within them continue their existence, transferred from location to location, just like the machines they inhabit, trapped in a cycle of restaurant openings and closures that persists until Henry Emily finally frees them in the fire at the end of Pizzeria Simulator, burning away their mechanical prisons and releasing the spirits to finally find peace. But during their time at the FNAF 2 location, during that specific week in November 1987 that Jeremy Fitzgerald experiences, the withered animatronics exist in a particularly awful state that deserves our recognition and consideration. They're broken, visibly damaged, relegated to a parts room, where they're literally being cannibalized for components to repair other machines. They're powerless during the day, unable to move or act or protect themselves. Yet at night, they hunt. Driven by programming they shouldn't have since they're supposedly offline, moving despite lacking power sources, attacking with purpose despite being officially deactivated. They're ghosts in broken machines, spirits trapped in bodies that barely function, and that combination of supernatural awareness imprisoned in deteriorating physical forms makes them among the most tragic and terrifying entities in the entire FNAF franchise. When Phone Guy mentions the bite of 87 in the very first 5 nights at Freddy's game, delivered as a casual aside in his Night 1 phone call, he couldn't have known he was introducing what would become one of the franchise's most debated and discussed mysteries. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, he remarks with his characteristic understatement, immediately establishing that something horrific occurred in 1987, an incident severe enough that it became part of company law, part of the warnings given to new security guards about why the animatronics must remain on their stages during operating hours. FNAF 2, by virtue of taking place in 1987, according to the paychecks Jeremy receives, should be the game that shows us this infamous bite, should finally reveal what actually happened during this incident that Phone Guy references so matter-of-factly. And in one sense, we do see consequences of the bite throughout FNAF 2's events. We experience the lockdown, witness the investigation unfolding through Phone Guy's increasingly worried calls, see the closure of the location that follows whatever terrible thing occurred. But the actual moment itself, the specific incident where an animatronic's jaws closed on someone's frontal lobe, crushing through skull and brain tissue in a catastrophic failure of safety protocols, remains frustratingly off-screen, occurring in the gap between gameplay and aftermath, shown to us only through implications and references rather than through direct depiction. The community has developed theories about Jeremy Fitzgerald being the bite victim, based on several pieces of circumstantial evidence that, when combined, paint a plausible picture. The timing aligns perfectly, with the bite implied to occur after night 6, presumably during the day shift that phone guy offers Jeremy on night 5, the position that suddenly became available when whoever previously held it was removed from the schedule. The pink slip Jeremy receives after custom night could potentially be the company's legal protection, terminating him before he could sue for injuries sustained on the job, cutting him loose before any liability could be established. The fact that the FNAF 2 location closes shortly after, with the toy animatronic specifically being scrapped rather than relocated or repaired, suggests that one of them was involved in an incident severe enough to doom the entire line, to make them unsalvageable in management's eyes. However, Jeremy being the victim isn't definitively confirmed through explicit statement in the games, leaving room for alternative interpretations. Some theorists propose different scenarios, different potential victims, but the evidence pointing to Jeremy remains the most commonly accepted within the community, the theory that best fits the available information. Yet, even accepting Jeremy as the likely victim, we still don't have answers to the most crucial question that has consumed FNAF theorists for years: which animatronic actually committed the bite? And perhaps more pressingly for our purposes tonight, for our exploration of William Afton's role in these events. Did Afton have any involvement in causing or triggering the incident? The most commonly proposed culprit for actually committing the bite is Mangle, the take apart and put back together attraction that sits in Kids Cove, constantly rebuilt by children during the day only to become a tangle of parts and wires by closing time. Several pieces of evidence point toward Mangle as the most likely biter, creating a case that many find compelling. First, Mangle's jump scare animation specifically targets the player's head, approaching from above with jaws wide open in a position that would perfectly align with biting someone's forehead, with crushing through the frontal lobe that Phone Guy describes. The mechanics of the attack, the angle of approach, the positioning of the jaws, all of these match what we'd expect from an animatronic committing the bite of 87. Second, and perhaps more significantly, Mangle is known to be active during the day, allowed to interact with children as part of the attraction's design. She's positioned in Kids Cove, where birthday parties might occur, where children gather, where someone could feasibly get close enough to her jaws for a catastrophic malfunction to occur. Phone Guy's comment on Night 3 adds weight to the Mangle theory in ways that careful listeners have noted. He mentions that they tried to remake Foxy, putting him in Kids Cove to be more kid-friendly, but children kept pulling the animatronic apart, leading management to leave her as a permanent take-apart attraction. This description perfectly matches Mangle's gameplay designation and appearance, confirming that Phone Guy is discussing the character we know as Mangle when he mentions the Kids Cove Foxy remake. If this animatronic is specifically noted as being problematic, as being in a state of constant disrepair, as being pulled apart repeatedly by children who don't understand the damage they might be causing to internal systems, it follows logically that she might malfunction in a catastrophic way. The bite of 87, occurring during a birthday party, presumably with children present as witnesses, would explain why it caused such a massive response from management and authorities, why the reaction was so severe and immediate. A child being injured or killed by an animatronic during a celebration meant to be joyful, in front of other children and their families, would be both a public relations disaster of unprecedented scale and a legal nightmare that could destroy the company. The immediate scrapping of the toy line, the closure of the location, and the implementation of the rule that animatronics must stay on stage during operating hours all make sense as responses to a very public incident, rather than something that happened during off hours when only staff were present. However, Mangle isn't the only suspect in this investigation. Toy Chica has her own compelling evidence, specifically a line she delivers in Ultimate Custom Night that seems like a direct reference to the bite. "Where's my beak?" she asks mockingly, menacingly, before answering her own question. "Lodged in your forehead, of course." This dark joke seems like a direct reference to the bite of 87, implying that Toy Chica bit someone in the forehead and left a piece of herself, her beak, embedded in the victim, requiring surgical removal or remaining lodged in the skull. If we take this line as canonical evidence rather than just a humorous callback or fourth wall breaking joke, it would make Toy Chica the prime suspect, directly confessing to committing the bite through this taunt. The problem with the Toy Chica theory involves timing and target selection. Phone Guy mentions on multiple nights that the toy animatronics have been behaving aggressively towards staff, but act fine around children, their programming making them friendly to kids, while treating adults as potential threats. If Toy Chica was going to bite someone based on this behavioral pattern, it would more likely be an adult employee than a child at a birthday party. But the severity of the incident, the policy changes that followed, the complete closure of the location, and scrapping of expensive animatronics, all of this suggests a child was involved rather than just another case of the animatronics attacking staff, which seems to have been happening regularly throughout the week without triggering such extreme responses. Toy Bonnie and Toy Freddy have also been proposed as possible bite culprits by various theorists, though with less supporting evidence than Mangle or Toy Chica. Really, any of the toy animatronics could theoretically have committed the bite, given that they all have jaws, they all interact with people during the day, they all have been described as malfunctioning or acting strangely. The lack of definitive visual confirmation of which animatronic was responsible. The absence of any minigame or cutscene showing the actual bite occurring means the suspect list remains frustratingly open, allows for multiple interpretations based on different readings of available evidence. Some theorists have even proposed that one of the withered animatronics committed the bite, suggesting that somehow these supposedly inactive machines managed to attack during the day shift. This theory is harder to support given that Phone Guy explicitly states the withered animatronics are kept in parts and service and shouldn't be able to move around during operating hours. Having one of them suddenly activate an attack during a birthday party would require explaining how they got out of the back room undetected, how they reached the party area without being stopped by staff, how they managed to attack before anyone could intervene, which seems implausible given the circumstances Phone Guy describes. The question of William Afton's involvement in the bite of 87 takes us into even murkier speculative territory, into areas where evidence becomes thin and theories multiply without clear ways to distinguish between them. Could Afton have deliberately caused or triggered the bite if he was working at the location, as some theories propose? Did he sabotage an animatronic systems, knowing it would lead to an attack, setting up conditions where a catastrophic failure became inevitable? The technical tampering Phone Guy mentions throughout the week, the modifications to the toy animatronics facial recognition software that made them aggressive, could these have been deliberate preparations for causing a violent incident? Afton's motive for causing such an incident isn't immediately clear when we try to think through his perspective and goals. If he's operating at the location to commit murders, to access victims, to continue his pattern of killing children, an incident that brings intense public scrutiny and police investigation, would seem counterproductive to those goals. The Bite of 87 essentially ends the FNAF 2 location's operation, forcing its closure and bringing attention to all the strange occurrences that have been happening there. This would work against Afton's interests if he's trying to maintain access to potential victims, if he needs the location to remain open and operating normally so he can continue his activities undetected. However, there's a darker possibility that some theorists have considered. What if the bite wasn't meant to happen at the FNAF 2 location at all, but rather was an unintended consequence of Afton's tampering with the animatronics for other purposes? If he modified their systems to make them more aggressive, perhaps intending to use them as weapons against specific targets, or to create chaos as cover for other activities, the bite could have been an accidental escalation beyond what he intended. The animatronics' increased aggression that Phone Guy attributes to possible tampering could have reached a threshold where they became genuinely dangerous even during normal operation, even when interacting with the children they were supposed to entertain. Another theory proposes that the bite might have been targeting a specific individual rather than being a random malfunction, that it could have been Afton using an animatronic as a weapon against someone who knew too much about his activities or who was getting close to uncovering his crimes. If this person was at the birthday party, perhaps as a parent attending with their child, or as an employee monitoring the event, Afton could have triggered an animatronic to attack them specifically, using the bite as a method of silencing a witness or removing an obstacle. The incident happening at a party would provide cover, making it seem like a terrible accident rather than a targeted assassination, allowing Afton to eliminate a threat while maintaining plausible deniability. The victim's identity remains another point of speculation beyond just whether it was Jeremy Fitzgerald. If Jeremy survived the bite and lived without his frontal lobe as Phone Guy described being possible, what happened to him after the incident? Did he receive compensation from Fazbear Entertainment, or was he left to deal with his traumatic brain injury alone? The pink slip suggests the company terminated him rather than supporting him through recovery, which would be typical of Fazbear Entertainment's callous approach to employee welfare that we see throughout the franchise, but raises disturbing questions about how Jeremy's life continued after this devastating injury, assuming he survived at all. Some theorists have proposed that Jeremy didn't survive, that Phone Guy's comment about living without a frontal lobe was hypothetical or sarcastic, rather than a description of the actual bite victim's fate. If the victim died from the bite, this would escalate the incident from tragic injury to manslaughter or murder, depending on how authorities classified an animatronic's actions, depending on whether they determined the machine malfunctioned naturally or was deliberately sabotaged. A death would also explain why the response was so severe, why the entire toy line was scrapped rather than just the specific animatronic involved being decommissioned and destroyed. The implementation of the rule that animatronics must remain on stage during operating hours, which Phone Guy mentions in FNAF 1 as being instituted after the bite of 87, becomes the incident's lasting legacy. This policy change fundamentally alters how Fazbear Entertainment operates, taking away one of the main selling points of their animatronics, their ability to walk around and interact with guests throughout the day, their role as roaming entertainers rather than just stage performers. The bite essentially ended the dream of truly autonomous entertainment robots, forcing the company back to traditional stage performances where mechanical performers stay in controlled environments where they can't get close enough to guests to cause harm. Yet even this policy change raises questions about how it might have affected William Afton's methods, if he continued operating after FNAF 2. If restricting animatronics to stages during the day makes it harder for them to be used as tools or weapons, did Afton resent this change? Or did he adapt, finding new ways to exploit the machine's capabilities during after hours when restrictions didn't apply? The timeline of his subsequent actions in later games suggests he remained undeterred, continuing his crimes despite increased security and changed protocols, finding ways around new obstacles just as he'd found ways around previous security measures. The Bite of 87 remains frustratingly undefined in its specifics, while being absolutely certain in its impact and consequences. Something terrible happened on day 7 of Jeremy's employment, during what should have been his first day shift. An animatronic bit someone, crushing through their skull, destroying their frontal lobe. The victim either died or survived with catastrophic brain damage. The incident ended the FNAF 2 location's operation immediately and changed company policy permanently. But who specifically bit whom? Whether William Afton played any role in causing or planning the incident, what the exact circumstances were that led to those mechanical jaws closing on human flesh, these details remain locked away, either in parts of the story Scott Cawthon hasn't revealed, or in interpretations of evidence we haven't properly understood yet. The Bite exists as a pivot point in FNAF's timeline, an event referenced throughout the series that we never quite witnessed directly, a tragedy that shapes policy and character motivations, but remains just out of frame when we look for concrete details. It's yet another unanswered question in FNAF 2's mystery-filled narrative, another piece of William Afton's potential involvement that can be theorized about but never fully confirmed. Another reminder that some horrors in this franchise are defined more by their consequences and their lasting impact than by their visible, documented details. The toy animatronics represent a complete redesign of Freddy Fazbear's cast, built from the ground up with modern technology and kid-friendly aesthetics that deliberately move away from the weathered, somewhat creepy appearance of their predecessors. They're sleek, colorful, equipped with advanced facial recognition systems, tied to criminal databases, designed to be both entertaining and safe in ways previous animatronics weren't. Phone Guy speaks about them with genuine pride in his Night One call, emphasizing the investment Fazbear Entertainment made in these new performers, the sophisticated technology that should make them the future of automated entertainment, the pinnacle of what the company could achieve. Yet within days of Jeremy's employment starting, it becomes abundantly clear that something is fundamentally wrong with these expensive, sophisticated machines. They attack, they stalk through the building at night with the same hostile intent as the possessed, withered animatronics. They crawl through vents and appear in hallways and approach the office with what can only be described as murderous purpose. For machines that were advertised as safe and advanced, that were supposed to represent the cutting edge of animatronic technology, their behavior is anything but reassuring or safe. Phone Guy offers an explanation on night 4, though his uncertainty is evident in his phrasing and hesitation. The characters have been acting very unusual, he notes, almost aggressive towards the staff, before adding with less certainty, someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems. We're not sure. This statement opens a Pandora's box of questions that theorists have been exploring for years. Who tampered with the systems? When did this tampering occur? Was it deliberate sabotage with malicious intent, or unintended consequences of attempted repairs? And most crucially, for understanding what's really happening, is technical tampering sufficient to explain the toy's behavior? Or is something else, something supernatural, also at play? The tampering theory presumes that a person, presumably someone with technical knowledge and access to the animatronics programming systems modified the toy animatronics facial recognition software in ways that corrupted their behavioral protocols. This modification caused the machines to misidentify adults as threats or as criminals in their database, triggering their safety protocols or stuffing routines inappropriately. In this interpretation, the toys aren't possessed or supernaturally influenced. They're simply malfunctioning. Their sophisticated programming corrupted in ways that produce hostile behavior without any spiritual component driving their actions. This technical explanation has merit when we examine certain aspects of how the toys behave. Their attacks can feel more mechanical in execution than the withered animatronics assaults, more like they're following program patterns rather than exhibiting the creativity or awareness that true consciousness might produce. Their facial recognition systems, designed to identify criminals, could theoretically be corrupted to identify all adults or all security guards as threats requiring response, explaining their aggression without needing to invoke supernatural explanations. But who would tamper with the systems, and why would they do it? The most commonly proposed suspect is William Afton, naturally given his established role as the franchise's primary antagonist. If we accept theories that Afton was working at the FNAF 2 location in some capacity, he would have had access to the animatronics, opportunity to modify their programming without being immediately detected, and motive to create chaos or misdirect attention from other activities. Afton's technical skills have been well established throughout the franchise through various games and materials. He designed and built the Funtime animatronics with their sophisticated AI and murderous capabilities built into their core functions. Tampering with the toy animatronics facial recognition would be well within his demonstrated abilities, a relatively simple task for someone with his expertise. Afton's potential motive for such tampering becomes clearer when we consider what chaos at the pizzeria might accomplish for him if he had other goals at the location. If the animatronics were attacking staff members and causing incidents, management's attention would be focused on controlling those situations, on dealing with aggressive machines and concerned employees, rather than investigating other suspicious activities. Night guards struggling to survive animatronic attacks would be less likely to notice someone moving through the building during their shifts, less likely to question unusual sounds or movements when they're already dealing with multiple threats. The aggressive animatronics become a distraction, a smokescreen that allows Afton to operate more freely. Additionally, if Afton wanted to create a hostile work environment that drove away security staff, making it difficult for the pizzeria to maintain adequate oversight, aggressive animatronics would serve that purpose effectively. Jeremy survives his week, but how many previous guards might have quit or been fired before him? Creating a revolving door of short-term security employees would mean nobody develops enough familiarity with the location to notice patterns or irregularities in how things operate. Nobody stays long enough to recognize that something beyond normal animatronic malfunctions is occurring. However, the tampering explanation faces challenges when we examine certain specific behaviors the toy animatronics display that seem to go beyond simple programming errors. They demonstrate what appears to be awareness, adapting their strategies when certain approaches don't work, learning to use vents after finding halls blocked, showing what reads as frustration or increased aggression when repelled repeatedly. These behaviors suggest something more than corrupted facial recognition, something closer to actual intelligence or consciousness driving their actions rather than just buggy code producing random hostile outputs. This brings us to the possession theory, the idea that the toy animatronics are haunted by spirits just like the withered animatronics are, that children's ghosts inhabit these machines and drive their aggressive behavior. If we accept that the Save Them minigame shows children being murdered at the FNAF 2 location, then those victim spirits would need to go somewhere, would need vessels to possess. The puppet's role in giving life to dead children, allowing them to remain in the physical world by possessing animatronics, suggests she might grant the same gift to new victims, letting them inhabit the toy line that happens to be the most prominent animatronics present at this particular location. Possessed toy animatronics would explain behaviors that technical malfunctions struggle to account for satisfactorily. Their aggressive pursuit of Jeremy would stem from the same confused vengeance that drives the withered animatronics, spirits of murdered children attacking adults they perceive as threats or as their killer. Their supernatural ability to move at night without obvious power sources, to appear in locations where their movements weren't detected by cameras or other monitoring systems. These would make sense as spiritual manifestations rather than as mechanical glitches or programming errors. The community has been deeply divided on the toy possession question for years without reaching consensus. Some point to the toys being scrapped at the end of FNAF 2 as evidence they weren't possessed, arguing that destroying possessed animatronics doesn't typically free spirits in the FNAF universe. So if the toys were haunted, we'd see those spirits appear in later games seeking new vessels. Others counter that perhaps these spirits were freed specifically because the toys were dismantled properly, that unlike the withered animatronics, which were recycled into new bodies for FNAF 1, the toy line's complete destruction allowed their spirits to move on in ways that weren't possible for other possessed machines. The possibility exists, and deserves serious consideration, that both explanations are correct simultaneously, that the toy animatronics suffer from both technical tampering and spiritual possession. William Afton could have modified their programming to make them aggressive while also being involved in murders that resulted in children's spirits possessing these same machines. The combination would create animatronics that are both programmatically hostile and supernaturally aware, doubling the threat they pose and making their behavior even more unpredictable and dangerous than either factor alone would produce. Consider how this dual influence might manifest in observable behavior. The facial recognition tampering makes the toys attack any adult they encounter, driven by corrupted programming that identifies all staff as threats. But possession adds intentionality to those attacks, transforms them from mechanical responses into conscious acts of vengeance or confusion. The tampering provides the mechanism, the how of their aggression, explaining why they move when they shouldn't and why they target guards specifically. The possession provides the motivation, the why of their specific targeting and their persistence, explaining behaviors that seem too intelligent or too purposeful for simple programming errors. Balloon Boy and the Puppet occupy interesting positions in discussions of toy animatronic behavior that complicate our attempts to understand what's really happening. BB doesn't directly attack Jeremy in the traditional sense, doesn't jump scare or stuff him into a suit, but rather interferes with his defenses by disabling the flashlight and creating vulnerability to other threats. This behavior seems too clever, too strategically sound for simple programming errors, suggesting either very sophisticated tampering or spiritual influence guiding his actions toward maximizing danger rather than just randomly causing problems. The puppet, meanwhile, operates under entirely different rules than the other toys, tied to her music box mechanic, manifesting only when that specific condition is violated. Her behavior is clearly supernatural, driven by Charlotte Emily's spirit, but she exists somewhat apart from the toy line's issues. She's not part of the facial recognition problem Phone Guy discusses. operates independently of whatever is causing the other toys to malfunction or attack. Phone Guy's uncertainty about the cause of the toy's behavior is particularly telling when we examine his exact wording. Someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems. We're not sure. This isn't the confident diagnosis of a company that has identified and is actively addressing a technical problem. This is speculation, a theory being proposed in the absence of clear answers, an admission that even the staff at the pizzeria with direct access to the animatronics and their programming systems can't definitively explain why their expensive, sophisticated machines are behaving like predators instead of performers. The company's response to the toy animatronics malfunction reveals priorities that align perfectly with Fazbear Entertainment's established pattern of valuing cost savings over employee safety. Rather than immediately shutting down the malfunctioning machines for thorough diagnostics and comprehensive repair, they simply warn Jeremy to avoid eye contact, to put on the Freddy mask when the toys enter his office, to work around the problem rather than fixing it properly. They treat the animatronics' homicidal behavior as an inconvenience to be managed with procedure rather than a crisis requiring immediate resolution, normalizing deadly danger as just another aspect of the job. This cavalier attitude towards employee safety creates an environment where someone like William Afton could operate with relative impunity if he chose to. If the company is already tolerating animatronics that attack their own security guards, if they're already normalizing dangerous conditions as standard operating procedure, then additional suspicious activities or incidents would be easier to dismiss or overlook, harder to distinguish from the baseline level of dysfunction that management has accepted as normal. The toy's aggression becomes background noise, one more problem in a long list of problems that nobody wants to properly address. We're left with a mystery that encapsulates FNAF 2's broader ambiguities perfectly. The toy animatronics are either suffering from tampering, from possession, or from both simultaneously. The tampering, if it occurred, was performed by someone with access and skills, possibly William Afton, but not definitively confirmed. The possession, if it exists, stems from murders that may or may not have occurred during the game's timeline, depending on which interpretation of the Save the minigame we accept. And the combination of technical and supernatural threats creates a hostile environment that serves someone's purposes, though whose purposes and why remain open to interpretation and debate. The toy animatronics stand as one more example of how FNAF 2 presents evidence without providing conclusions, shows consequences without clearly depicting causes. They attack, that much is absolutely certain. But why they attack, what drives their aggression, whether that aggression stems from corrupted code or tormented spirits or both, these fundamental questions about their nature remain unanswered even after more than a decade of community analysis, leaving us to theorize in the absence of definitive proof. The progression of Phone Guy's calls throughout Jeremy's week paints a picture of a situation spiraling increasingly out of control, with each night bringing new revelations about investigations, lockdowns, and company responses to events we never directly witness. These calls provide our primary window into what's happening at the FNAF 2 location, beyond the player's immediate experience of surviving animatronic attacks, and piecing together what they describe, or more accurately, what they carefully avoid describing in explicit terms, becomes essential to understanding the week's true events and William Afton's potential role in them. Night 3's call establishes that something is wrong, though Phone Guy couches his message in careful corporate-friendly language designed to reassure while simultaneously confirming there's reason for concern. I wanted to ease your mind about any rumors you might have heard lately, he begins, immediately confirming that rumors exist, that something is being talked about among staff or in the broader community. Something concerning enough that management feels the need to address it with employees. He doesn't specify what these rumors are about, doesn't give details that might confirm or deny specific allegations, leaving us to infer from context and from other evidence what people might be whispering about in break rooms and parking lots. Are people talking about missing children, about kids who came to birthday parties and never made it home, about the animatronics' strange behavior, their aggression toward employees that goes beyond normal malfunction, about suspicious employees or unusual activities at the pizzeria that someone witnessed but can't quite make sense of. Phone Guy's attempt to ease Jeremy's mind paradoxically confirms that there's something to be worried about. That concerns serious enough to generate rumors are circulating even if management wants to downplay their significance. By night 4, the situation has escalated significantly beyond vague rumors and whispered concerns. There's been somewhat of an investigation going on, Phone Guy reveals, his hesitation and verbal fillers betraying discomfort with what he's discussing, reluctance to say too much about matters that are clearly serious. He's quick to add reassurances that the company denies any wrongdoing, that these things happen sometimes in the restaurant business, attempting to normalize whatever is being investigated as routine rather than alarming. But investigations don't occur without substantial cause. Without someone presenting evidence or allegations serious enough that authorities feel compelled to examine the situation officially, rather than dismissing concerns as paranoia or misunderstanding. The nature of this investigation remains deliberately vague in Phone Guy's description, maddeningly non-specific in ways that leave room for multiple interpretations. He doesn't identify who is conducting the investigation, whether it's police, health inspectors, safety regulators, or some combination of authorities each examining different aspects of the pizzeria's operations. He doesn't specify what they're investigating beyond the general implication of potential wrongdoing, doesn't provide details that would help us understand whether this is about missing children, workplace safety violations, criminal activities, or something else entirely. The investigation could be into missing children, following up on the reports we might interpret from the rumors of Night 3, responding to parents who filed reports about kids who didn't come home, to witnesses who saw something suspicious. It could be into the animatronics' aggressive behavior towards staff, workplace safety concerns that reached a threshold where regulatory agencies felt compelled to intervene. It could even be into William Afton specifically, into suspicious activities or patterns that caught someone's attention, though Phone Guy never mentions any individual being targeted by the investigation in his carefully worded updates. Night 5 brings the lockdown, an escalation so dramatic that it signals we've moved beyond investigation into something approaching crisis response. From what I understand, the building is on lockdown, Phone Guy explains with concern evident in his voice. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees. This is a security measure that indicates something serious has been discovered or has occurred, something that requires controlling access to the building in ways that significantly disrupt normal operations. Lockdowns aren't standard protocol for minor issues or routine investigations. They're responses to crimes, to contamination scenarios, to situations where controlling who enters and exits becomes paramount to protecting evidence or preventing interference. The specific mention of previous employees is particularly intriguing and significant, revealing that this isn't a general lockdown affecting everyone equally. There's a specific concern about former staff members, about people who used to work at the location trying to enter the building now that it's under official scrutiny. This targeting suggests authorities or management have identified or suspect that a previous employee is involved in whatever prompted the investigation and lockdown. It could mean they've identified William Afton as a suspect if he was formerly employed there. Could mean they're concerned about someone returning to the scene of crimes they committed to tamper with evidence or threaten witnesses. Phone Guy also mentions on night 5 that a position just became available on the day shift, offering to move Jeremy to that role once everything is sorted out. This euphemistic phrasing raises dark implications that careful listeners have noted. Positions become available because someone left, quit, was fired, or in the worst possible case was injured or killed. Given the context of an ongoing investigation and a building under lockdown, the sudden availability of a day shift position suggests something happened to whoever previously held that role. Something significant enough to remove them from the schedule immediately without the usual notice or transition period. Could the previous day guard be a victim of the crimes being investigated? Someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and witnessed something that made them a target. If children went missing during day shift hours, the person who should have been supervising or monitoring might be either suspected of involvement or might have been harmed themselves for seeing something they shouldn't have. Alternatively, if we accept theories that William Afton was working at the location, the previous day guard might have been Afton himself, removed from the schedule when he became a suspect, or when evidence of his crimes reached a threshold that required his immediate termination and exclusion from the premises. Night 6 reveals the yellow suit incident that we've discussed previously, but it takes on additional meaning in the context of the investigation and lockdown that preceded it. Phone Guy's description of someone using a yellow suit and the animatronics not acting right afterward could be the breakthrough in the investigation, the discovery of physical evidence that explains how crimes were committed or who committed them. Finding that a yellow suit was used could confirm eyewitness reports of a mascot character leading children away, could provide forensic evidence linking someone specific to the suit through fibers or DNA or other traces, could be the piece that transforms suspicion into certainty. The location's closure announced on this same night 6 call follows logically from everything that has built up during the week. The investigation uncovered concerning information that couldn't be explained away or ignored. The lockdown attempted to secure evidence and control access while authorities built their case. The discovery about the yellow suit provided additional confirmation of criminal activity. And now the conclusion: the pizzeria is shut down, at least temporarily, until the situation can be resolved in whatever way management deems appropriate, whether that means criminal charges, civil liability settlements, or simply waiting for public attention to fade. What Phone Guy doesn't say throughout all these calls is as revealing as what he does mention explicitly. He never states that children are missing, though the rumors and investigation could certainly pertain to missing children. He never names William Afton or any other specific suspect, though the restrictions on previous employees suggest someone specific is being targeted. He never describes exactly what authorities found during their investigation, what evidence prompted the lockdown, what conclusions they reached about responsibility for whatever occurred. This careful avoidance could stem from legal concerns, from company lawyers advising staff not to confirm details that could increase liability. It could be Phone Guy's personal discomfort with disturbing subject matter, his tendency to focus on practical job information rather than dwelling on tragedies. Or it could be genuine ignorance, with Phone Guy not knowing the full details himself, having only the fragments of information that filter through company channels to regular employees. The investigation and its related lockdown stand as one more example of how FNAF 2 presents William Afton's involvement indirectly rather than explicitly. We never see police questioning him, never witness him fleeing the scene, never watch him being identified as a suspect or caught in the act. Instead, we hear Phone Guy's carefully worded updates, see the consequences of events we didn't witness, piece together a narrative from fragments, while knowing that crucial details remain forever out of reach, hidden in the spaces between what we're shown and what we must infer. One of the community's more intriguing theories about William Afton's presence at the FNAF 2 location proposes that he was actually working there as a security guard immediately before Jeremy Fitzgerald, that the previous employee Phone Guy mentions with such concern throughout the week was Afton himself. This theory attempts to explain several mysteries simultaneously, providing answers for how Afton gained access to the building, why the position was suddenly available for Jeremy, and what might have triggered the investigation that dominates the week's events, all while accounting for the badge we see on Purple Guy's sprite in the Save Them minigame. The foundation of this theory rests on several pieces of evidence that, when assembled, create a plausible narrative. Phone Guy's Night 1 call mentions that he used to work in the office before Jeremy, establishing there was at least one previous security guard at this location. He also mentions on multiple nights that the animatronics have been acting strangely, becoming aggressive toward staff, suggesting these behaviors started before Jeremy's employment began. If the animatronics' aggression correlates with William Afton's presence, as we've theorized might be possible with the possessed withered animatronics recognizing their killer, then that aggression beginning before Jeremy arrived could indicate Afton was working there during an earlier period. The Night 5 call provides perhaps the strongest piece of evidence for this theory. Phone Guy specifically states that the lockdown concerns previous employees being restricted from entering the building, and that a day shift position has suddenly become available. If we connect these statements, we can construct a narrative where a previous employee working the day shift has been identified as a suspect in whatever is being investigated, leading to that person being barred from the premises and their position opening up for Jeremy to potentially fill once the crisis passes. William Afton working as a security guard would align with patterns established elsewhere in the franchise, making this theory feel consistent with his character and methods. In FNAF 3, it's widely accepted that the Purple Guy sprite we see in the Follow Me minigames represents Afton returning to the abandoned FNAF 1 location years later. Comfortable infiltrating these buildings, moving through them with familiarity, if he's willing to break into locations after they close, working at them as an official guard would provide even better cover for after-hours activities, giving him legitimate reason to be in the building alone at night, access to all areas without raising suspicion. The theory proposes that Afton worked several nights at the FNAF 2 location, possibly committing the murders shown in the Save Them minigame during his employment there. His behavior or activities eventually attracted suspicion, perhaps because children were reported missing during weeks when he was working, perhaps because other staff members reported seeing him in areas he shouldn't be accessing, perhaps because the facial recognition tampering was discovered and traced back to someone with the technical knowledge and access that a security guard would have. When suspicions reached a certain threshold, the company might have moved Afton to the day shift, possibly believing this would limit his opportunity for wrongdoing or make it easier to monitor his activities, explaining Phone Guy's Night 5 mention of a day shift position becoming available. But then, when evidence of his crimes became clearer, or when he was directly implicated in the investigation, he was removed entirely from the schedule, his employee access revoked, and restrictions put in place to prevent him from returning to the location. This would explain the lockdown's specific concern about previous employees, the unusual emphasis on keeping former staff members away from the building during the investigation. However, this theory faces significant challenges that prevent it from being universally accepted. Contradictions that create problems for anyone trying to argue Afton was definitely the previous guard. First, the timeline doesn't align perfectly with Phone Guy's descriptions. If Afton was the previous night guard and was removed from the schedule before Jeremy started, why does Phone Guy's Night 1 call sound like it's introducing Jeremy to a relatively normal situation? There's no mention of unusual circumstances surrounding the previous guard's departure, no warning about investigations or problems that the last employee created. Phone Guy only begins discussing the investigation on Night 4, suggesting it started during Jeremy's week rather than before it, which contradicts the idea of Afton being a fired employee whose crimes were already under investigation. Second, if Afton was a known former employee who had been fired or removed from the schedule under suspicious circumstances, why would he still be able to access the building to use the yellow suit, as seems to have happened based on the Night 6 phone call? The lockdown restricting previous employees should have been implemented immediately if management suspected Afton of wrongdoing, preventing him from returning to tamper with evidence or continue whatever activities led to his termination. The fact that the lockdown only happens on Night 5 suggests the suspect's identity might not have been known earlier, which contradicts the idea of Afton being an obviously problematic employee who was already removed from the schedule. Third, the theory requires Afton to have been working at the location openly, presumably under his real name, which seems risky for someone who has committed multiple murders and managed to evade serious consequences through careful operation. Would Afton really apply for a security guard position using his actual identity, submit to whatever background checks or employment verification might exist, work openly where other employees could observe and remember him? It seems contrary to the careful, secretive approach he displays in his other confirmed activities throughout the franchise. The identity of the first night guard or the suspicious day shift worker or whatever role Afton might have played at the FNAF 2 location remains one more unresolved aspect of his involvement in these events. We see clues suggesting an employee was involved in wrongdoing, see evidence that someone with access and knowledge committed crimes, see restrictions being placed on previous employees in ways that suggest specific individuals are under suspicion. But connecting these elements definitively to William Afton, confirming that he held an official position at this pizzeria, rather than infiltrating it through other means, requires leaps of inference that can't be fully supported by what the game explicitly shows or tells us through Phone Guy's carefully worded updates. After examining all the evidence, analyzing all the theories, considering every piece of Phone Guy's calls and every frame of the minigame's cryptic imagery, we arrive at a conclusion that is itself inconclusive, an ending that acknowledges the journey continues rather than claiming we've reached a destination. FNAF 2 refuses to provide definitive answers about William Afton's role in its events, and this isn't a failure of the community's theorizing or a lack of effort in analysis. The FNAF community has demonstrated extraordinary dedication and cleverness over more than a decade, dissecting every detail of these games with forensic precision, uncovering connections and patterns that casual players would never notice. If definitive answers existed in the available evidence, if Scott Cawthon had hidden solutions waiting to be found, the community would have discovered them by now through sheer persistent effort. The persistence of multiple competing theories, each with supporting evidence, and each with contradictions that prevent universal acceptance, suggests that FNAF 2 was designed to resist simple interpretation, to maintain ambiguity as a core feature of its storytelling approach, rather than as an accidental byproduct. William Afton's presence haunts FNAF 2 in the same way his victims' spirits haunt the animatronics, visible in shadows and implications and consequences, rather than in direct, explicit confirmation. We see his purple sprite in the Save Them minigame with his badge and his hostile intent. We hear about someone using a yellow suit in ways that match his established methods. We observe the investigation and lockdown that could be responses to his crimes, but we never get the equivalent of a clear statement saying William Afton worked at this location in this capacity, committed these specific murders on these specific dates, and was identified as a suspect leading to these specific responses. The mysteries we've explored throughout this analysis, the yellow suit incident, the possible second missing children incident, the toy animatronics tampering or possession, the bite of 87, the shadow entities, the investigation and lockdown, all represent pieces of a puzzle that doesn't form a complete picture no matter how many different ways we arrange them. Some pieces seem to fit together naturally, creating sections of coherent narrative, but gaps remain. Edges don't align properly, and the overall image stays fragmented and incomplete. What we can conclude with reasonable confidence is that something terrible happened at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during 1987. Children likely died, though when exactly and how many remains uncertain and debated. William Afton appears connected to these deaths based on his presence in the Save Them minigame, and the pattern of his crimes elsewhere in the franchise, making him the obvious suspect. The location faced investigation, lockdown, and ultimately closure as a result of events during or shortly before Jeremy Fitzgerald's employment. And the consequences of whatever occurred rippled forward through the franchise, influencing policy with new safety rules, affecting characters whose fates were shaped by these events, contributing to the cycle of tragedy that defines Fazbear Entertainment's history across decades. But the specifics, the exact timeline, the precise sequence of events, Afton's exact role and methods during this particular week, these remain in the realm of theory rather than confirmed fact. We can propose that Afton was working at the location in some official capacity, but we cannot prove it conclusively. We can suggest he tampered with animatronic systems to create chaos, but we cannot confirm this is what actually happened. We can theorize about his involvement in the bite of 87, but we have no definitive evidence linking him to that specific incident beyond general suspicion. This uncertainty reflects a broader truth about FNAF's storytelling approach that has defined the franchise since its beginning. Scott Cawthon has built a series that thrives on mystery, that generates engagement through speculation, rather than through straightforward exposition. The gaps in FNAF 2's narrative aren't oversights waiting to be corrected in future revelations or patches. They're intentional spaces left for player interpretation, areas where the community can debate and theorize without being constrained by official answers that would limit creative engagement with the material and shut down discussion. For some fans, this approach is deeply frustrating and unsatisfying. They want definitive timelines with confirmed dates, verified character identities, explicit explanations of events that leave no room for misinterpretation. They want to know exactly what happened, when it happened, who did it, and why, with the same certainty they might expect from a traditional narrative. The lack of these confirmations feels like unfinished storytelling, like a narrative that hasn't fulfilled its obligation to provide resolution to the questions it raises, leaving audiences hanging without the payoff they've earned through their attention and investment. For others, the ambiguity is precisely what makes FNAF compelling and endlessly fascinating. The mysteries become participatory, inviting players to become theorists, to engage with the material actively, rather than passively receiving information spoon-fed through cutscenes and exposition dumps. The debates about what William Afton did in FNAF 2 are part of the experience, part of what makes the game memorable and discussion-worthy years after its release. If Scott Cawthon released an official statement tomorrow confirming exactly what happened during that November week, it would end the speculation immediately, but might also diminish the engagement that speculation generates, the community connections formed through shared theorizing. William Afton's role in FNAF 2 exists in this liminal space between known and unknown, between evident and mysterious. He's certainly there in some capacity. His influence shapes events in ways we can observe. His presence explains aspects of what we witness through gameplay and phone calls. But the full extent of his involvement, the complete picture of his actions and methods during this specific time frame, remains just out of reach, visible enough to confirm he was significant, but not clear enough to explain exactly how, detailed enough to generate theories, but ambiguous enough to prevent definitive proof. As we conclude this exploration into one of FNAF's most persistent mysteries, we're left with the same fundamental questions we started with, though hopefully with a deeper understanding of why those questions persist, why they resist resolution, why after more than a decade they continue to generate discussion and debate. What was William Afton doing at the FNAF 2 location during Jeremy's week? Was he the previous night guard, a day shift employee, an infiltrator with no official position? Did he commit the murders shown in Save Them during this specific week, or earlier in the summer? Or are those sprites representing something else entirely? Did he tamper with the toy animatronics systems? Did he cause or trigger the bite of 87 through deliberate action or accidental consequence? Was he identified during the investigation and lockdown, or did he escape once again? These questions don't have answers we can present with absolute certainty and definitive proof. They have theories, interpretations, possibilities supported by some evidence, but undermined by contradictions, explanations that work until we examine them too closely and find the cracks. And perhaps that's exactly as it was intended to be, exactly what Scott Cawthon designed when he created this prequel that somehow made everything more confusing, rather than providing the clarity prequels typically offer. Perhaps William Afton's role in FNAF 2 is meant to remain mysterious, a shadow in a game full of shadows, a presence felt but never fully seen or understood. For those who have followed this analysis, whether encountering these details for the first time or revisiting familiar mysteries through a new lens, I hope this exploration has illuminated the complexity of FNAF 2's narrative and the reasons why, after more than a decade, we still find ourselves debating the same fundamental questions about what William Afton did during that week in November 1987. The questions persist not because the community lacks dedication or insight, but because the game was designed to raise them without providing definitive answers, creating a mystery that continues to engage and frustrate in equal measure, that invites endless discussion without offering final resolution. The horror of FNAF 2 lies not just in the jump scares or the tension of surviving until 6 a.m., but in the unanswered questions, in the implications of events we can't quite piece together, in the knowledge that something terrible happened without ever getting complete clarity about what that something was. William Afton moves through this game like a ghost, present but intangible, influential but unclear, leaving traces of his involvement without ever fully revealing himself or his actions. And maybe that's the most frightening thing of all, knowing that evil was present, that crimes were committed, that victims suffered, but never being able to assemble the complete picture, never achieving the closure that comes with full understanding. Whether you found this deep dive enlightening or whether it simply confirmed what you already suspected, that FNAF 2's mysteries may never be fully solved, the journey through these questions remains worthwhile, remains valuable. The exploration itself has meaning even without definitive destination. The theorizing and analyzing and discussing contributes to our engagement with this franchise in ways that matter regardless of whether we ever achieve consensus. And as we drift toward the end of this analysis, toward rest and whatever dreams may come, we carry with us not answers, but deeper appreciation for the questions themselves, for the mysteries that refuse to be solved, for the shadows where William Afton may forever lurk just beyond the reach of certainty. Until next time, may your nights be filled with mysteries that intrigue rather than disturb, with questions that comfort rather than terrify, and with the peaceful acceptance that some stories are defined more by what they don't tell us than by what they reveal.